Mr. President, from our earliest days, long before the Founding Fathers gathered in Philadelphia to declare 13 colonies that were knighted and, quote, absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, long before they sought to form a more perfect union, our streams and our rivers and our lakes have been the economic lifeblood of our nation. They have supported commerce and trade, fishing and agriculture. They have facilitated the ability to travel, the vastness of this continent. They have sustained our growing communities and served as critical resources for public health. It's no wonder, then, that generations of Americans have worked incredibly hard to protect these natural resources, to keep them clean and safe. That's why here in the Senate and in the House, in 1972, we passed the Clean Water Act. It formed the foundation for our nation's water regulations. It's why 2 years later, the House and Senate developed and passed the Safe Drinking Water Act to make sure that public drinking water supplies were safe throughout the nation. Now, I recall the impact of these acts in my home state of Oregon. The Willamette River was considered extraordinarily polluted. You could boat down it and see pipes dumping into it at regular intervals. And then over time, as the state worked hard to identify those pipes, remove those pipes, make sure that all pollution went through water treatment, the river got better. It got healthier. Now, it's not without its problems. Its problems still exist. There's still non-point pollution that affects life in the stream. But it's a far more beautiful and far healthier river than it was before we passed the Clean Water Act. We have proceeded to be fairly fierce about our enforcement. We have prosecuted polluters who have bypassed the law and dumped the results of their processes directly into our streams and our waterways. And we've worked to protect wetlands, and we've worked to protect estuaries, understanding more and more about the role that these various bodies of water play in our economy, play in our natural system, and making sure they can continue to play that role so that we have a sustainable environment and one that's not at war with our economy. And we've made the two work very well together. And we've accomplished all this through the debate and dialogue that we have had here in the Senate and that we've had over in the House, that the experts have brought to bear in our committee hearing rooms. We've accomplished it through the testimony of concerned citizens across the nation who identified one particular problem or another problem and have brought those challenges to us here in this body, and we've worked to address them. And if you've ever visited a nation that didn't have this kind of process and seen the intense, incredible pollution of its waterways, then you know what a difference it makes to have this public process. I invite you to go and visit China and see what happens when there's no public process for taking into account and rectifying the challenges when industrial wastes are simply dumped into our waterways. So we take a lot of pride in protecting our streams, our rivers, and our lakes. And that process has continued over these past years in the Department of Interior, where the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement was working on the Stream Protection Rule. Now, I'm going to show you a picture here that just gives you some scale of the type of mining that the Department of the Interior and the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation Enforcement was trying to address. You see here the little tiny tractor. This is actually a massive tractor, dwarfed by the scale of this massive mine. And indeed, in many cases, the entire top of the mountain is blown off to get at the coal seams underneath. And in the process, a tremendous amount of rock debris is created. and a tremendous amount of fracturing that can lead to water that moves through the water table and eventually finds its way into streams. And the goal has been to find a way that this type of mining can be done in respectful balance with the streams that are further down the mountainside. So that's the challenge. And it wasn't easy to address this, and that's why this rule has been under development for 7 years, from 2009 right up through December of 2016, virtually the entire length of the Obama administration. And during this period of consideration, it's been multiple reiterations of what the rule could look like and what actually works in the real world. Stakeholder after stakeholder after stakeholder saying this is what you have to do to make it work. Because the goal was that this type of mining would be done, but not in a fashion which would destroy the streams. And that's why it took so much hard work to do this. There were hundreds of hours of meetings, responses to over 114,000 comments on the rule. But here we are, here in the evening, with little attention being paid by the vast bulk of senators, spending just a couple hours and planning to undo this work. Now, under the Senate rules, under this Congressional Review Act, we have just 10 hours of debate, and some of that can be yielded back by one side or the other, so maybe it'll only be a few hours of debate. And in those few hours, we hold in our hands the fate of the streams that are downstream from this mining. Are we going, this is the premise, will we conduct this mining in a fashion and follow up with restoration to protect the streams that will otherwise be devastatingly impacted? And I'm here to say, yes, let's take to heart the 100,000 plus hours of work, or the 114,000 comments and the multitudinous meetings over 6 years, the work of professionals who talk to every stakeholder. Let's take to heart their work and not undo it in just an hour or two here on the floor. Now, the Senate works in a way now where even with something that has such a profound impact, senators aren't here listening to each other. And thus, we're not sharing our thoughts back and forth the way the old Senate used to debate. And so it's almost in silence that we're undoing, or potentially undoing, all of this work. Shouldn't we be celebrating that so many folks came together to craft a strategy that would not cause this type of mining to destroy the down mountain streams? Let me show you an example of what a down mountain stream looks like. This is a stream that probably ran blue not too long ago. It now runs orange. It's full of toxic metals and who knows what. I rather doubt that any member of the Senate would volunteer to go and take a cup of water from this stream and drink it. Because you just look at it and you know that it's deadly. So we're trying to keep in place a rule carefully crafted so that this stream, which not so long ago ran blue or ran turquoise or deep green because it was a natural stream without this devastating pollution, will stay in that natural state. That's the goal. That's the point of this rule. I want to be very clear that the stream protection rule is designed to enable mining and stream sustainability to go hand in hand. Now, coal mining is changing in America. It's adopted a number of practices that has made it safer. The machinery has also gotten bigger in ways that mean far fewer people are employed in it. It's also changing because the economies of the energy market are changing. We see that the natural gas prices have dropped so low that many utilities are shutting down their coal plants and they are opening up natural gas plants, or they are investing in wind or solar renewables. But we need to recognize that for 150 years, coal mining families have worked incredibly hard at great personal risk to their health to put a meal on their table and to provide power to our nation. So let's have this conversation about protecting our streams with a full respect for the mining economy and the families that have put their lives at stake and worked to put food on the table. But there is no reason that we can't do what we've done in so many other parts of our economy to make the industrial process or the manufacturing process or the mining process be one that works in harmony with our environment instead of at odds with the environment. That's the goal of the Stream Protection Rule. It updates our 30-year-old coal mining regulations to better reflect the industry as it is today in 2017. And the fact is, we know a great deal more about the impacts of various coal mining processes, the impact they have on both people and communities and the environment, much more now than we did when most of the regulations were put together decades ago. We know that when you use explosives to blast the summit of a mountain, as you do in mountaintop removal, everything gets blasted up into the air and pushed down into the valleys and ends up in the rivers and streams. Well, what's the result of that? Well, if that newly blasted rock doesn't block the flow of the river or stream entirely, it is still in constant contact with them, leaching out pollutants into the water. And those pollutants include things like heavy metals and other toxics. And these pose enormous threats to the region's fish and to the plants and to the animals, and yes, even to the people who live downstream. There are pollutants like selenium, a metalloid that is toxic to fish at even a very low level, causing deformities, causing reproductive failures, causing death. Now, one way to tell the health of a stream is that it has life in it. But I doubt anyone would come out and say, last year I fished here when this was a blue-green stream, but this year I'm not, because one glance at this stream and you know all the fish are dead. And there's other pollutants like cadmium, a pollutant that is not safe at any level and has been tied to cancer in humans. So as the cadmium goes down with the water and the water is pulled out of the stream for cities further down, small towns further down, it adds to the health risks of the folks living in the area. The waste dumps, called valley fills, are left in place even when the mining is completed and the company moves on. And we know that the rubble from the mountaintop mining is impacting our streams and waterways because we've measured it. According to the Environmental Protection Agency's statistics, valley fills from mountaintop removal are responsible for burying 2,000 miles of vital Appalachian headwater streams. Now, 2,000 miles, that's a lot of streams. Picture 2,000 miles of a blue-green stream reduced not just to a toxic red stream, but to no stream at all because it's been completely covered and eliminated. And we know that in addition to the loss of 2,000 miles of streams, that's a lot of fishing holes that are gone forever. We know in addition to that the fish populations downstream have been reduced by 2/3 from the places where mountaintop removal is occurring. And we know that communities nearby are contending with contaminated drinking water and that the babies are being born with higher rates of birth defects. Now, I think about the birth of my 2 children. And I think, like every parent, you pray and hope that that child is going to be born free of birth defects. So this rule is about something very close to our hearts. For some, that's the beauty of natural streams. For some, it's the opportunity to fish and see wonderful natural places. But for others, it comes straight to the question of whether or not their children are going to be born with birth defects. And at the other end of life, we see downstream elevated levels of lung cancer, elevated levels of heart disease, elevated levels of kidney disease, elevated levels of hypertension. So I ask you, is it right that here in the dark of night, in just a few hours of discussion, with virtually no one here in the Senate chamber, we're going to undo 7 years of work that are designed to reduce those birth defects, reduce the lung cancer, reduce the heart disease, reduce the kidney disease, reduce the hypertension, reduce the contaminated drinking water. Because in just a few short hours, we're making a decision that will result in the impact on thousands and thousands of people, as well as thousands and thousands of miles of streams. So the stream protection rule is pretty straightforward in its design. And I'll give you a few details about what it is intended to do. Well, one is it improves construction standards for waste piles. Well, what is a waste pile? Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's a pile built from accumulated rock waste that is removed when you do mountaintop mining. And why do we need to improve their construction? Because these piles grow to enormous size. They can involve millions and millions of tons of rock and debris. And over time, erosion in the soil around them can create dangerous, unstable slopes, and that can eventually produce a landslide. So how you design it matters. And these coal piles can have very high levels of coal dust or hydrocarbons. And then there's the acid rock drainage. So as water comes down in rain and it percolates down through these, it ends up seeping out into the groundwater or into the stream and poisoning the groundwater or poisoning the stream. So that's why it matters how you have a construction standard for a waste pile. Isn't it smart to have such a standard in place, and one that's been developed over hundreds of meetings over 6 years, so that the mining is much more compatible with clean streams and healthy people? Well, another thing this rule does is it enhances restoration by strengthening bonding requirements. It's not unknown, unfortunately, that coal miners would just abandon the mine once their operations are finished, leaving all sorts of undone business that adds to the enormous contamination that even a small amount of mining can do. So back in 1977, Congress passed a law saying that miners needed to restore the land after they've mined, after their mining operation is completed, and that they needed to provide a bond up front to pay for the cleanup costs just in case the company decided it didn't want to follow through on the cleanup after it completed extracting the coal. Well, strengthening that and making sure the bonding process actually works right, that the bond is actually there to do the cleanup, that makes a lot of sense. Now, years ago, I was immersed in first developing housing with Habitat for Humanity and then building affordable multiplexes for a nonprofit, Human Solutions. And companies that were being paid to do their work, they had a construction bond. The bond made sure that if the company somehow disappeared in the middle of the night, the work was going to get done. That bond was very important to the nonprofit, that what they were investing in, the payments they made, were going to actually result in what was contracted for being delivered. Well, that's the same thing here. A company that comes in and says, we got permission to mine, is just saying to the public with a good bonding system, yes, you can be confident that the cleanup work will be done. And that needed to be strengthened because often it's not done. So that is another piece of this puzzle. And then there's another piece that's related to coal slurry and reducing the odds of coal slurry causing a lot of damage. Now, coal slurry is liquid waste generated when mined coal is washed off. And so you have a lot of water that's kind of thickened with the debris from washing the coal, and it can be held basically in a basin. But if the walls of that basin fail and that coal slurry gets into the streams, it does massive damage. Just such a thing transpired in Martin County, Kentucky 16 years ago. An estimated 306 million gallons of slurry spilled into two tributaries of the Tug Fork River. Now, how much is 306 million gallons? Well, it's a lot of swimming pools, almost more than you could imagine. But another way to look at it is 30 times larger than the Exxon Valdez oil spill, one of the worst environmental disasters ever. Well, so there it is. It is a big, massive pond that spills into the forests and into the rivers in that situation in Martin County. Overnight, one of the tributaries, the Coldwater Fork, a 10-foot wide stream, became 100 yards of slurry. In some places, the spill was over 5 feet deep. It's spread out and covered people's yards on the banks. Hundreds of miles of the Big Sandy River were polluted as a result, as the stuff washed down the stream. The Ohio River was polluted. The water supply for 27,000 people was contaminated. And it's not that it just happens once. It's happened other times. It happened in Buffalo Creek Hollow in West Virginia in 1972. In that case, it was 132 million gallons of slurry. Well, that's about a third the size of the other spill, so I guess you could say that instead of being 30 times Exxon Valdez, it was only 10 times Exxon Valdez. But it did a lot of damage. It created a wave going downstream that was 30 feet high. Can you imagine how much material is required to create a wave, a flash flood of coal slurry 30 feet high? This didn't just happen away from human civilization. This wave of coal slurry killed 125 people. This wave of coal, toxic coal slurry, hit and injured over 1,000 people, 1,121 more people. It left 4,000 people homeless, wiping out their homes, their towns. The type of damage that can occur. So why not have a rule that has looked at how these ponds are created and said, here's the standard so that the pond is not overloaded or overtopped, or the wall does not collapse and cause a tidal wave that will kill more than 100 people or injure more than 1,000 or leave 4,000 people homeless. Having a standard is just the logical thing to do. Then it's a help to the companies because then they know exactly what they need to do to make that pond safe. So that's some of the examples of what's in this rule. And I think it's important to understand another factor, that this rule requires careful mapping before the mining is done so that the restoration process can be held accountable to restore the contours that existed previously or as close as you can get. Without an understanding of what the land looked like beforehand, it's hard to say what it should look like when it's restored. So those are just common sense measure. That's it, common Common sense, common standards for safety, for protection of the streams and the wildlife and the people. And isn't that what we should be all about? And shouldn't we not be undoing that as we are in a couple hours in a deserted Senate chamber in the middle of the night? That is wrong. If you want to change these standards, and I say this to my colleagues who I know many do care a great deal about the environment, then have the courage to do it in daylight. Have the courage to do it in a committee. Have the courage to invite the public in to testify. But here we are tonight, hiding from the population across America, undoing this important work for the safety of our people. That is wrong.